geometry concepts, hopefully some of which will be a little bit familiar to you, either from previous years or some of the stuff you guys have been doing in Dreambox. So I want you to look right here at this first set of notes that is talking about angles. So when I'm talking about an angle, that's this guy right here, and I'm going to start here. An angle is formed by two, this is hopefully a word that you should know, rays with a common endpoint. So for example, here my two rays are BA and BC. And something you'll notice about that is they have a common endpoint, common endpoint being, in this case, B. What we're going to call that is the vertex. And when I'm talking about those rays are just called the sides of the angle, so nothing too fancy there. We're going to be talking a lot about specific angles, so we're going to have to name them. When I'm talking about them kind of in shorthand, a symbol that I'm going to use is that. So it kind of looks like a little angle. And the way I'm usually naming them is with 3 letters. Now I can name them in a couple of different ways, but the thing that really is important, where this little asterisk is that the middle letter, when I'm naming them, always has to be the vertex. So for example, this angle over here, the one on the left side of your picture, I can call that angle ABC, or I can call it angle CBA. It's kind of like a little map drawing out that angle. So I start at A, I go to B, I go to C, or I can start at C, go to B, and go to A. Notice I'm mapping out the exact same angle. The only thing that's important is that B is hanging out right in the middle. And there's also a note down here that says angles can also be named using just the vertex if it's only the only angle located at that vertex. And we'll look at some more complicated pictures that'll make a little bit more sense. But in this case, I could also call this thing angle B because it's not that complicated of a picture. Now, when I'm actually talking about the measure of an angle, notice there's a measure hanging out inside angle ABC up here. I'm going to use a lowercase m. So what I mean by that is I can say the measure of angle ABC, that's how I read that little statement, is equal to 60 degrees. We're also going to talk about how to classify angles. So there's 4 different angles that we're really going to look at. So we're going to draw a couple pictures and I'm going to put a little description beneath them. The first one that I want to talk about is one that looks like that. And it is called an acute angle, which you should probably know from previous years. All that means it's an angle that measures less than 90 degrees. And we're going to kind of go from small to large here. So kind of right in the middle, we mentioned 90 degrees because that's kind of what a lot of these are based on. It's called a right angle. And those are angles that are equal to 90 degrees. Next one up is an obtuse, which measures more than 90 degrees. And the last one, which is a straight line. And that's equal to 180 degrees. So that's the 4 different types of angles that we're really going to look at, and we're going to practice classifying in this next example here, and then you're going to try one on your own. So a couple questions they ask here using that information we filled out up there. Name the vertex of the angle. Remember, the vertex is the point that lies right in the middle of those 2 rays that make up the angle. So in this case, vertex is K. The sides of the angle are those 2 rays that meet at that common endpoint that meet at K. The important thing about naming these sides of the angles is you always have to start with what that endpoint is. Rays, you need to start with the endpoint. So I'm going to say those rays are KL and KJ. And notice the way that I say ray KL or ray K, I don't know why I wrote, that looks like an S, or ray KJ, is I draw like a little ray right on top of it. Next question is, give 3 ways to name the angle. Remember, the thing that's most important is that if I'm naming it with 3 letters, which you usually do, the vertex has to be right in the middle. So I can call this angle KJL, or I can go the other direction, keeping the vertex in the middle, LKJ. Or since this picture isn't too complicated, I can just call this angle K. And then, now there's no angle measure on this, so I can't give like a number measurement for it, but I can classify it based on, if I look at these pictures up here, the one that it most closely resembles is that third one, the obtuse, because it's bigger than 90, but it's not quite a straight line, so I'm going to call it obtuse. So pause the video for a second, and you try example 2. Okay, you should be back now. I want you to flip to this next page that says solving for angle measures. So I'm going to show you, we're going to look at 3 different types of problems, and you're going to try a couple of them on your own. The first one is one like number 1. So it says the measure of angle A is 12x minus 5. If x equals 9, find the measure of A, then classify the angle. So all you're really doing here, they're giving me an algebraic expression for what the measure of angle A is. So I'm going to say, okay, the measure of angle A is 12x minus 5. And that's really just putting the pieces in the problem together. But now they're actually telling me what x equals. So I'm going to say, okay, x times 12 times 9, because x is actually 9, they told me, minus 5. Do that math out, it's going to give me 103. So I can say the measure of angle A is equal to 103 degrees, which, going by our measurements from different types of angles, that's an obtuse angle. So take a second. You guys are going to do questions 2, 3, and 4, which are very similar to that one. Okay, now let's take a look at number 5. This one says the measure of angle C is 19x minus 3, and the measure of angle D is 8x plus 10. If the sum of the measures of the angles is 115, find the measure of each angle. So we have to do a little bit more work here. So what they're telling me, they're giving me these 2 algebraic expressions for these different angles, but they're not telling me what x is this time. But they're telling me when I add those measures together, they equal 115. So what they're really saying is the measure of C plus the measure of D is 115. Now, I don't have actual numbers for x, but I can plug the things that I've got into this little equation I've got. I know that measure of C is 19x minus 3 plus the measure of D is 8x plus 10, and that together those are going to be 115. Now this should start to look a little familiar to you. It's one of our equations that we looked at earlier this year. Our goal now is that we need to solve for x. So remember, when I'm doing that, first thing I need to do, I need to combine like terms. So my like terms I've got a 19x and an 8x, and then I've also got like terms in that negative 3 and that positive 10. I'm actually going to put shapes around them because that helps some people. So when I put those things together, what that's going to give me is I have 27x's Negative 3 plus 10 gives me positive 7. Now I've cleaned that up a little bit. Now this should look a little bit easier to us. My first step to start to solve this is to subtract 7 on both sides. So 27x equals 108. Let me move this over here so we have a little bit more room. And then my last step to get x by itself would be to undo that multiplication between 27 and x by dividing. So x is going to equal 4. I'm not done yet, though, because they're actually asking to find the measure of each angle. The way that I need to do that is I need to plug into each of these equations they gave me, or each of these expressions they gave me. So I have these two different expressions. Now I actually know what x equals. So I can say, okay, angle C is 19 times 4 minus 3, which equals 73 degrees. And then angle D is actually 8 times 4 plus 10, which is 42 degrees. Go ahead and try number 6. Okay, the last type of problem that we are going to look at is one like number 7. So it says the measure of angle E is 18 degrees more than the measure of angle F. If the sum of the measures of the two angles is 96, find the measure of each angle. This is kind of similar to some word problems that we did before, where it was like, well, I have two numbers that one is 4 times greater than the other one or something like that, and their sum is 85 or something. It's very similar to that. We're just putting it in the context of an angle this time, but solving it is very much the same. So I'm saying the measure of angle E is 18 degrees more than the measure of F. Much like the other problems we were doing, pretty much for all of these, one of your angles is going to be just x, and then the other angle is going to be using x and doing stuff to it, adding to it, multiplying it, something. So in this case, if angle E is more than F, F is kind of my base. F is kind of, think of it as like an independent variable, and E is my dependent one. E depends on F. So if F is x, E is 18 more than that. And once I do that, I can solve this exactly like the other ones up top. I know that together, those two angles, so let me kind of code this a little bit. Remember, angle F was x, and angle E was x plus 15, and together, they're 96. So now I'm going to do this math out. Again, combine like terms. My like terms in this case are x and x, which will give me 2x. 18 can't go with anything. Now I'm going to start moving some stuff around. I'll subtract 18 from both sides. And then x is 39. And now, again, find the measure of each angle. I have to go back and actually plug in to the equations that I set up. So measure of angle F was just x itself, so that's 39. Measure of angle E, I got to add 18 to it, so that would give me 57 for that. So those are my two angle measures. You try 18.